I never thought I would end up in a war with my neighbor over snow. But that is exactly what happened when Patricia Donovan decided she owned not just her property line, but apparently mine too. It started on a brutally cold Tuesday morning in Duluth, Minnesota, where the snowfall had been relentless for 3 straight days. I woke up at 5 in the morning like I always did, to get ready for my shift at the steel plant where I worked as a quality control supervisor. My name is James Anderson, and I had lived in the Maple Ridge subdivision for about 4 years at that point. The neighborhood was nice enough, with well-maintained lawns in the summer and decent folks who mostly minded their own business. Then Patricia Donovan became the president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association about 6 months earlier, and everything changed. Patricia was your typical middle-aged busybody with that specific haircut. You know the one, where it is short in the back and angles down toward the front. She wore oversized sunglasses even in winter, and drove a white Mercedes SUV that she treated like it was made of glass. She had inserted herself into every possible aspect of neighborhood life since taking over the HOA, sending violation notices for the most ridiculous things. My buddy down the street got fined because his trash can was visible from the road for more than 2 hours after pickup. Another neighbor received a nastogram because their Christmas lights were the wrong shade of white, but I had managed to stay off her radar until that Tuesday morning. I pulled on my insulated work pants and thermal shirt, grabbed my thermos of coffee, and headed out to my truck. That is when I saw it. A massive wall of snow, easily 4 feet high, completely blocking the end of my driveway where it met the street. Not just a little drift that had blown there naturally, but a perfectly formed barrier of hard, packed snow that someone had deliberately plowed there. I stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, my breath forming clouds in the negative 15-degree air, and felt my blood pressure rising. The city snowplow had already gone through hours ago. I could tell because the street was clear. This was fresh snow, piled up recently, and it was obvious where it had come from. There were clear plow marks leading from Patricia's driveway across the street, where her property sat at a slight angle, directly to the end of mine. I checked my watch. 5:20 in the morning, and I needed to be at work by 6:30. The plant was a 20-minute drive, which meant I had maybe 40 minutes to deal with this mess. I went back to the garage, fired up my snow blower, and got to work. The snow was heavy and wet underneath, the kind that feels like you are moving concrete. It took me 35 minutes of hard labor to clear enough space to get my truck out, and by the time I finished, I was sweating despite the frigid temperature and running late. I made it to work 7 minutes late, which earned me a talking to from my supervisor. It was the first time I had been late in 2 years, but that did not matter. I was furious the entire shift, my mind churning over what Patricia had done. When I got home that evening around 4, I noticed her Mercedes was parked in her driveway. She was home, probably sitting in her overheated house, pleased with herself. I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt, even though my gut told me it was not an accident. I walked across the street and rang her doorbell. She opened the door wearing a fluffy white bathrobe and holding a glass of red wine, even though it was barely 4 in the afternoon. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone making it clear she found my presence an inconvenience. "Hey, Patricia, I am James from across the street. I just wanted to mention that there was a big pile of snow blocking my driveway this morning. I noticed the plow marks came from your driveway. I figured maybe your plow guy did not realize what he was doing." She took a sip of her wine and looked at me like I had just asked her to donate a kidney. The HOA parking and driveway regulations clearly state that all snow removal must be completed within 12 hours of snowfall cessation. Your driveway was not cleared in time yesterday, so I had my snow removal service take care of the situation. I blinked at her. Take care of what situation? My driveway was clear. I cleared it myself yesterday afternoon. The apron was not cleared to HOA standards, she said, referencing the small section where the driveway meets the street. There was still approximately 2 inches of snow coverage, which violates Section 7, Paragraph C of the HOA guidelines. As president, I have the authority to enforce compliance. So you had someone block my driveway with 4 feet of snow because there were 2 inches left on the apron. I had the snow relocated to your property since the violation originated from your property. Perhaps next time you will be more thorough in your snow removal duties. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a conference call with the HOA board in 10 minutes. She shut the door in my face. I stood there on her porch, stunned by the sheer audacity of what had just happened. This woman had actually justified blocking my driveway, making me late for work, and forcing me to do an extra 35 minutes of snow removal in sub-zero temperatures because of 2 inches of snow on the street apron. The worst part was, I checked the HOA guidelines when I got home, and there was no such Section 7, Paragraph C. She had made it up over the next few days. I tried to let it go. I really did. I told myself she was just a bored, power-hungry woman with too much time on her hands, and that engaging with her would only make my life worse. But then it happened again on Friday morning. Another massive snowbank, another morning of frantic shoveling, another lecture at work. This time I took photos and checked my security camera footage. Sure enough, there was Patricia's snow removal truck at 3 in the morning, deliberately pushing all the snow from her driveway directly into mine. I printed out the footage, documented everything, and sent a formal complaint to the HOA board via email, copying all 5 members including Patricia. I explained the situation calmly and professionally, attached the evidence, and requested that they instruct Patricia to stop this behavior. Within 2 hours, I received a response from Patricia's personal email account, not the official HOA one. Dear Mr. Anderson, your complaint has been reviewed by the HOA board and found to be without merit. As president, I have full authority to enforce neighborhood standards as I see fit. Additionally, we have received multiple complaints about your property, including excessive noise from your garage activities, improper lawn maintenance, and unauthorized exterior modifications. You will be receiving formal violation notices shortly. Regards, Patricia Donovan, HOA President. The violation notices arrived in my mailbox the next day, 3 of them in official HOA envelopes with certified mail stickers. The first claimed I had been running power tools in my garage after 8 p.m., which was false. I barely used my garage for anything other than parking. The second alleged that my grass had been over 4 inches tall in October, which was absurd considering it was winter and had been for months. The third, and this one really got me, stated that I had painted my front door without HOA approval. My front door had been the same dark green color since I bought the house. I had never painted it. I took pictures of everything, documented the dates, and prepared to fight these bogus charges. But then I found out that Patricia had stacked the HOA board with her friends. 2 of them were her former co-workers, 1 was her sister-in-law, and the other 2 were neighbors who depended on her for various favors. Fighting through official channels was going to be pointless. That is when the idea came to me. Patricia had a very specific schedule, I had noticed over the years. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, she left her house at exactly 7 in the morning, dressed in business attire, to go to her job as a regional manager for some insurance company in downtown Duluth. She was obsessively punctual, the kind of person who probably had a panic attack if she was 2 minutes behind schedule. And her driveway, due to the angle of her property, tended to accumulate snow drifts pretty badly during heavy snowfall. The weather forecast showed a major storm system moving in on Tuesday night, with predictions of 8 to 12 inches of heavy, wet snow. Perfect. I waited until Tuesday evening, watching the snow begin to fall around 6 p.m. It came down steadily throughout the night, thick and heavy, blanketing everything in white. I set my alarm for 2 in the morning and tried to get some sleep, though I was too amped up with anticipation to truly rest. When the alarm went off, I checked outside and saw at least 10 inches had already fallen, with more coming down. The city plows had not made their rounds yet. I bundled up in my warmest gear, went out to my garage and started up my snow blower. The machine was industrial grade, something I had bought used from a landscaping company that was upgrading their equipment. It could move a serious amount of snow fast. I spent about 20 minutes clearing my own driveway and walkway, making sure everything was perfect and up to code, even the apron that Patricia cared so much about. Then I crossed the street. Patricia's house was dark, everyone inside asleep and cozy. I positioned my snow blower at the bottom of her driveway and got to work. I took all the snow from her front yard, from the street in front of her house, from her neighbor's yard with their permission, which I had gotten earlier that day, and I piled it all right at the end of her driveway. But I did not just pile it randomly. I created a wall of snow that was at least 5 feet high and 6 feet deep, packed solid by the snow blower's discharge chute. The snow was that heavy, wet kind that freezes almost immediately in the cold, turning into something close to ice. By the time I finished around 4 in the morning, Patricia's driveway was completely impassable. You would need either a professional plow truck or several hours of manual labor to get through it. I cleaned up any evidence that I had been there, making sure the snow looked like it had naturally drifted into that exact spot through some freak occurrence of wind patterns and storm positioning. It actually looked pretty natural if you did not know better. I went back home, put away my equipment, took a hot shower, and went to bed. I set my alarm for 6:45, wanting to be awake to see how this played out. When my alarm went off Wednesday morning, I made coffee and positioned myself by my front window with a good view of Patricia's house. At 6:50, right on schedule, her porch light came on. At 6:55, her garage door started to open. That is when I heard it, the shriek that probably woke up half the neighborhood. What the hell is this? Patricia came storming out of her garage in her business suit and high heels, staring at the massive wall of snow blocking her exit. She had her phone out immediately, and I could see her pacing back and forth, gesturing wildly as she made calls. After about 10 minutes of that, she went back inside. I assumed she was calling her snow removal company, trying to get emergency service. I finished my coffee, got ready for work at my normal pace, and drove off around 7:15. As I passed her house, I could see Patricia in her living room window, still in her suit, phone pressed to her ear, looking absolutely furious. When I got home from work that afternoon, her car was still in the garage. The snow wall had been reduced somewhat but was still blocking at least half her driveway. It looked like she had tried to shovel some of it herself, based on the sad little dent in one corner and the shovel abandoned in the snow. Thursday morning, the same thing. Her car never left the garage. I later found out from a neighbor that Patricia's snow removal company had told her they could not get there until Friday because they were swamped with emergency calls from the storm. She had apparently tried to hire 3 other companies, but they were all booked solid. The wall of snow was so massive and so well packed that it was not something she could clear herself, especially not in business attire and heels. Friday morning, I watched as a professional plow truck finally showed up at her house around 6 in the morning. It took them nearly 2 hours to fully clear the driveway because of how packed and frozen the snow had become. By the time they finished, Patricia had already missed a third day of work. I saw her finally leave her house around 10 in the morning, her face tight with rage as she backed her Mercedes out of the driveway. I thought that would be the end of it. I had made my point. She had suffered the consequences of her actions, and we could move on with our lives. I was wrong. That afternoon, I came home to find a notice taped to my front door. It was from the HOA, signed by Patricia, informing me that I was being fined $500 for destruction of common area landscaping and unauthorized snow removal activities. According to the notice, someone had witnessed me using my snow blower on HOA common property without permission, and the heavy equipment had allegedly damaged the grass underneath the snow. This was complete fiction. I had only cleared my own property and Patricia's driveway, which was private property, not common area. And you cannot damage grass that is dormant under 10 inches of snow with a snow blower. But Patricia was clearly retaliating, and she had the backing of her puppet board members. I decided it was time to escalate. I started documenting everything obsessively. Every email, every notice, every interaction. I also reached out to other neighbors who had been victimized by Patricia's HOA reign of terror. Turns out there were a lot of them. The guy with the trash can violation, the family with the wrong Christmas lights, a woman who had been fined for having a vegetative garden in her backyard that was supposedly visible from the street, even though you would need binoculars to see it. Even a retired couple who had received a violation notice for having their garage door open for more than 2 hours on a Saturday while they were cleaning it out. We formed a group, about 12 families in total, and started comparing notes. The pattern was clear. Patricia was abusing her position as HOA president to harass people she did not like, make up violations that did not exist in the actual HOA bylaws, and pocket the fine money. That last part was the key. When we cross-referenced the HOA financial records, which we were legally entitled to see as homeowners, we discovered that thousands of dollars in fines had been collected over the past 6 months, but there was no corresponding record of where that money went. The HOA bylaws stated that all fine revenue was supposed to go into the Common Area Maintenance Fund, which paid for things like landscaping the entrance, maintaining the neighborhood pond, and fixing the playground equipment. But the maintenance fund balance had actually decreased over the past 6 months, despite all the fines Patricia had been levying. I volunteered to dig deeper into the finances since I had experience with auditing and quality control from my job. What I found was damning. Patricia had opened a secondary bank account in the HOA's name, one that required only her signature for withdrawals. She had been depositing the fine money into that account and then transferring it to her personal checking account, sometimes the same day. In total, she had embezzled nearly $15,000 over 6 months. This was no longer a petty neighborhood dispute. This was criminal theft. I compiled all the evidence into a detailed report, had it reviewed by a lawyer friend who confirmed it was solid, and then I faced a decision. I could bring this to the HOA board, but they were all Patricia's allies and would likely try to bury it. I could bring it to the entire neighborhood at the next HOA meeting, but Patricia controlled the meeting schedule and could potentially cancel or delay it. Or I could go straight to the police. I chose the police. On a Monday morning, I walked into the Duluth Police Department and asked to speak with someone about HOA fraud and embezzlement. They directed me to a detective named Maria Rodriguez who specialized in white-collar crime. I laid out everything for her, provided copies of all my documentation, the bank records, the emails, the fake violation notices, everything. Detective Rodriguez listened carefully, asked pointed questions, and then told me she would investigate. She explained that HOA embezzlement cases were more common than people realized and were taken seriously by the department. She also warned me that the investigation would take time and that I should not confront Patricia or tip her off in any way. 2 weeks passed. During that time, Patricia continued her reign of terror, issuing more fake violations to me and others in our group. She seemed to sense that something was happening, that people were organizing against her, and she ramped up her aggressive behavior. She started showing up at people's houses unannounced to conduct property inspections, which she had no legal authority to do. She sent threatening emails about liens being placed on homes for unpaid fines. She even tried to have one neighbor's car towed from their own driveway, claiming it was a commercial vehicle because it had a company logo on the side. Then, one Thursday morning, I was getting ready for work when I heard the commotion outside. I looked out my window and saw 2 police cars parked in front of Patricia's house, lights off but unmistakably official. Detective Rodriguez and 2 uniformed officers were at Patricia's front door. I watched as they spoke with her, showed her some documents, and then escorted her to one of the patrol cars. She was not handcuffed yet, but it was clear this was not a friendly visit. Later that day, I received a call from Detective Rodriguez. She thanked me for bringing the case to their attention and informed me that Patricia had been arrested and charged with theft by swindle, a felony in Minnesota when the amount exceeds $10,000. She had also been charged with multiple counts of fraud related to the fake violations and unauthorized bank account. The detective told me that Patricia had initially denied everything, but when confronted with the bank records and paper trail, she had admitted to taking the money. Her justification was that she deserved extra compensation for the time and effort she put into managing the HOA, completely ignoring the fact that the HOA president position was a volunteer role. The neighborhood erupted with the news. Within hours, everyone knew that Patricia had been arrested. The HOA board held an emergency meeting that evening, which I attended along with about 30 other homeowners. The board members who were Patricia's cronies tried to downplay the situation, suggesting that there had been a misunderstanding about the finances, and that Patricia had meant to properly document the transfers. That is when I stood up and dropped the bomb. I had brought copies of all the evidence, including the fake violation notices, the fabricated bylaw sections, and the pattern of harassment. I distributed them to everyone in the room and walked them through exactly what Patricia had been doing. I showed them how she had targeted specific people, made up rules, and stolen money from the HOA coffers. By the time I finished, the room was in an uproar. The board members who had enabled Patricia tried to defend themselves, claiming they had not known what she was doing, but nobody was buying it. Multiple homeowners stood up and shared their own stories of harassment and fraudulent fines. One woman broke down crying as she explained how Patricia had threatened to foreclose on her house over a $300 fine for having the wrong color mailbox, something that was not even mentioned in the HOA rules. By the end of the meeting, the entire board had been forced to resign. We held an immediate election for interim board members, choosing people who had been vocal critics of Patricia's regime. The first act of the new board was to void all the fines Patricia had issued during her tenure as president and to begin the process of recouping the stolen money from her. Over the next few months, the legal process played out. Patricia's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was not interested in going easy on her. The case went to trial in May. I testified, as did several other neighbors. The evidence was overwhelming, and the jury found her guilty on all counts after deliberating for less than 4 hours. The judge sentenced Patricia to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months, plus full restitution of the $15,000 she had stolen, along with interest and court costs. Her lawyer argued for leniency, painting her as a dedicated community volunteer who had made some poor choices, but the judge was not sympathetic. He noted that Patricia had held a position of trust within the community and had systematically abused that trust for personal gain while harassing innocent people. Patricia's husband filed for divorce 2 weeks after the sentencing. Turned out, she had been using the stolen HOA money to fund a shopping addiction he had not known about. Their house went on the market in June and sold within a month. I never saw Patricia again after the trial. The new HOA board did a complete overhaul of the bylaws, implementing proper financial controls, term limits for board members, and a clear appeals process for any violations. They also established that all fines had to be approved by a majority vote of the board, not just the president acting alone. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, though it took a while for people to trust the HOA system again. As for the snow situation, it never happened again. The new board clarified that homeowners had 24 hours to clear their driveways after a snowfall, and that minor snow accumulation on aprons was not a violation. They also explicitly prohibited anyone from using snow removal as a tool of harassment or retaliation. I ran into Patricia's ex-husband about a year after everything went down. He was shopping at the same hardware store I was, and we ended up in line together. We made awkward small talk for a minute, and then he thanked me. He said that he had been miserable for years, living under Patricia's controlling behavior, but had felt trapped. The arrest and everything that followed had given him an out, and he was happier than he had been in decades. He had moved to a condo in downtown Duluth with no HOA and was dating someone new. Looking back on the whole situation, I sometimes think about that morning when I first saw the snowbank blocking my driveway. I was so angry, so frustrated by the unfairness of it all. But if Patricia had not pushed things so far, if she had not retaliated against me for retaliating against her, I might never have dug into the HOA finances. I might never have discovered the embezzlement. And she would have continued stealing from and harassing the neighborhood for who knows how long. The experience taught me a lot about standing up to bullies and the importance of documentation. It also taught me that sometimes petty revenge, like blocking someone's driveway with a strategic snowbank, can lead to much bigger revelations. Not that I recommend taking the law into your own hands, but I also cannot say I regret what I did that snowy morning at 2 a.m. My life in Maple Ridge is pretty quiet these days. I still live in the same house with the same dark green front door that I apparently painted without permission, even though I did not. My driveway is always properly cleared within the required 24 hours, apron included. I even joined the HOA board for a year, serving as treasurer to help implement the new financial controls and make sure nobody ever pulled a Patricia Donovan again. Every winter, when the first big snow comes, I think about that Wednesday morning when Patricia discovered the massive wall of snow blocking her driveway. I think about the shriek that woke up the neighborhood, the sight of her pacing in her business suit and heels, phone pressed to her ear, unable to get to work. And I admit, I smile a little. She missed 3 days of work because of that snowbank. 3 days of sitting in her house, frustrated and furious, unable to do anything about the situation. In the grand scheme of things, compared to the embezzlement charges and the prison sentence, those 3 days were nothing. But for me, they were everything. They were justice for the early morning she cost me, for the lecture I got from my supervisor, for the fake violations and the harassment. I learned something important through this whole mess. Sometimes the smallest act of retaliation can set off a chain of events that leads to real justice. If I had not built that snowbank, I would not have been motivated to dig deeper into Patricia's activities. If she had not retaliated with fake fines, I would not have organized the other neighbors. If we had not compared notes, we would not have discovered the embezzlement. Each domino had to fall for the next one to tip over. The neighborhood still talks about the Patricia situation occasionally, usually when someone new moves in and asks about the HOA. We have a little orientation packet now that explains the history and the reforms we implemented. Most people are shocked when they hear the story, but also relieved that there are safeguards in place now. I still use that same industrial-grade snow blower every winter. It is a beast of a machine, powerful and reliable. Whenever I fire it up, I remember that night at 2 in the morning, methodically building a wall of snow while the rest of the neighborhood slept. It was cold, exhausting work, but it was also strangely satisfying. Every scoop of snow, every pass of the machine, felt like I was taking back some small measure of control in a situation where I had been made to feel powerless. My neighbor across the street, the one who gave me permission to use the snow from his yard that night, became a good friend through all of this. His name is Mike Sullivan, and he was one of the first people to join my group when I started organizing against Patricia. He had received 4 separate violation notices in 3 months, all for things that were either completely made up or so minor they should never have warranted official action. One was for having a decorative garden gnome in his front yard that Patricia claimed was aesthetically inconsistent with neighborhood standards. Mike and I still laugh about the gnome incident. After Patricia was arrested and the new board took over, he bought 6 more gnomes and arranged them in a little village scene in his front garden. Nobody said a word because, of course, there was no actual rule against garden gnomes. It was just Patricia making things up to flex her power. The whole experience made me appreciate the good parts of community living while also recognizing the potential for abuse in systems like HOAs. When they work properly, with honest people following reasonable rules, they can help maintain property values and keep neighborhoods pleasant. But when someone like Patricia takes control, they can become instruments of tyranny on a micro scale, making people's lives miserable over the most trivial matters. I think about the retired couple who got a violation for having their garage door open too long. They were in their 70s, moving slowly, cleaning out decades of accumulated stuff. It took them longer than 2 hours because that is just how long it took. Patricia could have stopped by, introduced herself, maybe offered to help or at least asked if everything was okay. Instead, she sent them a formal violation notice with a $50 fine. That is who she was, someone who saw every interaction as an opportunity to assert dominance rather than build community. The trial was really the culmination of everything. Sitting in that courtroom, watching Patricia try to justify her actions, was surreal. Her lawyer painted this picture of her as a dedicated volunteer who had gotten confused about financial procedures, like she had accidentally deposited HOA money into her personal account 15 times over 6 months. The prosecutor tore that argument apart, showing the jury how deliberate and systematic the theft had been. When it was my turn to testify, Patricia's lawyer tried to make me look like a disgruntled homeowner with a personal vendetta. He asked about the Snow incident, implying that I had manufactured the entire embezzlement case because I was angry about a petty dispute. I calmly explained the timeline, how I had only started investigating after Patricia retaliated with fraudulent fines, and how the evidence of theft was undeniable regardless of my motivations. The jury seemed to understand that even if I did have a personal grudge, the facts were still the facts. The moment the guilty verdict was read, I felt this wave of relief wash over me. It was not about revenge at that point. It was about validation, about knowing that the system had worked and that Patricia would face real consequences for her actions. I looked around the courtroom and saw other neighbors who had been victimized by her, and the relief on their faces mirrored my own. Patricia's sentencing hearing was even more dramatic. Several neighbors gave victim impact statements, describing how her harassment had affected their lives. One man talked about the stress-related health problems he had developed while fighting her bogus violations. A woman described how her teenage daughter had been embarrassed at school when word got around that their family was being threatened with foreclosure over a mailbox color. By the end of the hearing, even Patricia seemed to realize the extent of the harm she had caused, though she still maintained that she had been trying to maintain neighborhood standards. The judge was particularly scathing in his remarks before sentencing. He noted that Patricia had held a position of trust and had betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way. He pointed out that HOAs exist to serve homeowners, not the other way around, and that her behavior had perverted the entire purpose of the organization. When he handed down the 3-year sentence, you could feel the collective satisfaction in the room. Life moved on after that. The new HOA board did good work, and the neighborhood improved. We started having actual community events, like summer barbecues and holiday parties, things that brought people together instead of driving them apart. Property values in Maple Ridge actually increased after Patricia left, which I found ironic considering she had justified all her strictness as being necessary to protect home values. I eventually stepped down from the HOA board after my 1-year term. I had helped set up the financial systems and oversight procedures, and I felt like I had done my part. Someone younger and with more energy took over as treasurer, and the neighborhood was in good hands. I was happy to go back to being a regular homeowner, taking care of my property without the added responsibility of managing community affairs. The snow blower incident became something of a legend in the neighborhood. People knew I had done it, even though I had never officially admitted to it. It was one of those open secrets that everyone understood but nobody talked about directly. New neighbors would sometimes ask me about it, having heard stories from others, and I would just smile and change the subject. Let them believe what they wanted to believe. I did run into Detective Rodriguez one more time, about 6 months after the trial. She was having coffee at a cafe I frequented, and she invited me to sit with her. We talked about the case, and she told me that it had actually led to a broader investigation into HOA fraud across the region. Apparently, Patricia's scheme was not unique, though hers had been particularly brazen. The publicity from her arrest and conviction had encouraged other homeowners to examine their own HOA finances, and several more cases of embezzlement had been uncovered. Rodriguez thanked me again for bringing the case to her attention. She said that white-collar crime often went unreported because people did not think it was serious enough, or did not know how to navigate the legal system. My detailed documentation and willingness to follow through had made her job much easier and had resulted in real justice. That conversation reinforced my belief that standing up to bullies, even when it is hard and uncomfortable, is always the right choice. As I write this, it has been almost 3 years since that snowy Tuesday morning when Patricia first blocked my driveway. 3 years since I discovered what it felt like to be targeted by someone with petty power and a vindictive streak. 3 years since I learned that sometimes you have to fight back, even if it means getting creative with a snow blower at 2 in the morning. Patricia is probably out of prison by now, or will be soon with parole. I do not know where she went after her release, and I do not particularly care. Her chapter in the Maple Ridge story is over, and the neighborhood is better for it. The lessons she taught us, though painful at the time, have made us more vigilant and more engaged as a community. We pay attention now to who is on the HOA board and what they are doing. We ask questions and demand transparency. We do not just assume that people in authority have our best interests at heart. My own life has settled into a comfortable routine. I still work at the steel plant, still live in the same house, still clear my driveway within the required 24 hours whenever it snows. I have a girlfriend now, Rachel Thompson, who moved into the neighborhood about a year ago. She bought Patricia's old house after it sat empty for a few months following the sale to a real estate investor. Rachel renovated the place completely, exorcising whatever bad energy Patricia had left behind and turning it into a warm, welcoming home. Rachel thinks the whole Snowbank story is hilarious. She was not there for any of it, so to her it is just an entertaining tale about neighborhood drama and creative revenge. Sometimes, I worry that I come across as petty when I tell the story, but she always reassures me that I did the right thing. Standing up to bullies is never petty, she says, and exposing criminals is always righteous, regardless of how you got there. We were talking about it just last week, actually, sitting on my couch during another snowstorm. Not as bad as the one 3 years ago, but enough to blanket everything in fresh white powder. Rachel looked out the window at her driveway, the same one that used to be Patricia's, and asked if I had ever been tempted to build another strategic snowbank. I laughed and told her that those days were behind me. One act of snow-based revenge was enough for a lifetime. Besides, the new HOA system worked well, and there was no need for vigilante snow removal anymore. But even as I said it, I felt that little spark of satisfaction remembering how perfectly everything had worked out. The snowbank had been the catalyst for everything that followed, the pebble that started the avalanche. Rachel then asked me what I would do if someone like Patricia ever took over the HOA again. Would I fight back the same way? Or would I have learned some lesson about taking the high road? I thought about it for a minute before answering. I told her that I would still fight back, absolutely, but I would probably skip the snowbank phase and go straight to investigating the finances. Though I admitted, the snowbank had been pretty satisfying in its own right. She kissed me on the cheek and said she was glad I was the kind of person who stood up for what was right, even when it would have been easier to just let things slide. That meant a lot to me because there had been moments during the whole ordeal when I questioned whether I was doing the right thing or just being vindictive. But looking back with the perspective of time, I know I made the right choices. Maybe not every single choice was perfect, but the overall arc was just. The neighborhood kids have even turned the story into a kind of local folklore. They talk about the Great Snow War and the evil HOA queen who got defeated by the Snow Warrior. It is wildly exaggerated and embellished, as these things always are with kids, but I find it endearing. They see me as some kind of neighborhood hero, which is both flattering and slightly embarrassing. I am just a guy who refused to be pushed around and who got lucky that his act of petty revenge revealed a much bigger crime. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had not built that snowbank. Would someone else have eventually discovered Patricia's embezzlement? Would she have continued stealing until she had drained the HOA accounts completely? Would other neighbors have kept suffering under her harassment without ever organizing to fight back? It is impossible to know, but I like to think that things happened the way they were supposed to happen, that every action and reaction was part of a larger pattern leading toward justice. The snow is still falling outside as I write this, and I can see my snow blower sitting in the garage, ready for action. Tomorrow morning I will get up early, clear my driveway and walkway, make sure the apron meets the clearly defined HOA standards, and head off to work. It will be routine and boring and exactly how it should be. No drama, no harassment, no walls of snow blocking anyone's way. But I will always remember that Wednesday morning 3 years ago, standing at my window with my coffee, watching Patricia discover the consequences of her own behavior reflected back at her in 5 feet of packed snow. I will remember the shriek, the pacing, the phone calls, the frustration. I will remember thinking that maybe, just maybe, she was learning what it felt like to be on the receiving end of petty tyranny. And most of all, I will remember that sometimes standing up to a bully requires creativity, determination, and a really good snow blower. The rest, as they say, is just details.